follow me on Twitter or something, because I'm like, it's been bothering me since the very first time I read this. Like, what's his real name? Because Zoria, she takes it, but we never know what it is. Does it really matter? I don't know. It's just, it's a puzzle. Anyways, but he's also a very avid reader. He's very well read, and that's and I like that, because that's not generally something that you associate with someone who's big and don't fuck with me looking, you generally tend to associate brawniness with brainlessness in literature and in television and stuff like that. And even in Norse theology, you look at Thor, who is Odin's son. And, Mr. Wednesday, of course, is the American version of Odin, father to Shadow. And so, anyway, so you see this sort of parallel between Thor and Shadow in the brawniness, but Shadow clearly got Wednesday's cunning. Now, we never get to meet Thor in the book. I'll probably get more into this in another episode. But we never get to meet Thor, and I think part of that is because we have Shadow, and Shadow's sort of, in a lot of ways, the new Thor. The American Thor? I don't know. But we learn that he has a very avid mind. Like, early on in the book, he references this a couple of different times. Herodotus, he reads Herodotus when he's in prison, when he's hanging on the world tree, and he's, for all intents and purposes, dead. And he's sort of looking back on his life and going through his past. You see him in a hospital room with his dying mother, and in order to avoid facing the reality of the situation, he's reading Gravity's Rainbow. And, I mean, he makes these little remarks all over the place that are so interesting. And the one thing that I find fascinating is he's so well read, but somewhere along the line he just didn't really spend much time on mythology, and that seems contradictory to me, because he's constantly having to be explained, or having to have people explain to him various different things about mythical creatures and stories and stuff. Which, I mean, moves the storyline, but seems kind of counterintuitive in my mind to him being so well read. I mean, oftentimes he does know sort of, kind of, the things going on, but he often has to be told, and I think that's more for the reader's sake than for Shadow's sake or anything like that. So that's I think that pretty much covers his skill set. I'm terrible at segues. Can you tell? I'm awful at them. Because my mind bounces around as I'm talking. My mind's going, okay, I want to talk about this, and then I want to talk about this, and then I want to talk about way back here over, That's the nature of being ADD, I think. Anyways, I have notes here. Oh, so, yes. So that brings me to what I thought I'd be able to segue into seamlessly, but didn't. Epic fail. And that is his character arc. So, when I was... This is going to seem tangential to this whole character analysis, but I swear it'll come back. Okay, so stick with me. When I was in doing junior college, basics at a local junior college, I took an American literature class, and my teacher talked about picaresque. And I don't know if this is something that he's come up with or what, but he described picaresque And this is something that you see a lot in American literature. And it's usually a work of literature that has a protagonist who's a bit of an anti-hero, not traditionally heroic and, Ivanhoe sort of, guy, or gal for that matter, but you usually see guys. It's episodic in nature, meaning that you've sort of got little episodes that happen that connect to each other, and ultimately at the end, your protagonist isn't really all that changed. So the examples he gave us to examine for this genre of American literature were Huck Finn, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and I think he actually classified One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as being this, and I can see why. And then I think eventually we'll talk about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And then Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And I sat down and talked to him about it, and I said, would Catcher in the Rye fall under this category? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. So there are some examples. So looping back around to American Gods, I feel American Gods falls into this category. I have tried to research this picaresque. That's how he pronounced it, picaresque. I've tried to research it as a literary genre. Can't find anything. Then again, I might not be looking that hard. But going with that, what my teacher defined as picaresque back then, this would clearly fall under it, because you've got this protagonist who's a bit of an anti-hero. He's not your traditional heroic type. He's an ex-con. He's big enough and don't fuck with me enough that people steer clear of him. He's not somebody that you generally tend to see as being like the hero. And he has these little episodic adventures with Wednesday, and they rob a bank and they fly across the country and do this and do that and do the other thing. But his character arc, he's he's distrusting. In the very beginning, he's described as not believing anything unless he could tangibly see it, touch it, feel it, smell it, whatever. Unless it was tangible and easy for him to perceive, he didn't believe in it in the beginning. And so he goes on this whole crazy adventure and stops this war between the old gods and the new gods and all that fun stuff. And then at the end, we see him traveling the world. God only knows how, but we see him traveling the world, and we meet up with him in Reykjavik, Iceland, and finding the Icelandic version of Odin and talking to him. And ultimately, the only difference between the shadow we met at the beginning of the book in prison and the shadow we meet at the end of the book in Iceland is he just knows that all the gods are real and that they are made real by human belief. That's the only difference. He is basically the same guy, distrusting, keeps to himself, tries to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, but at the same time still trying to look out for himself. Generally, mild temperament. He's still the exact same person at the beginning than at the end, except now he knows this. And so there's not that much of a character arc, because we have that whole episode of him doing Odin's Vigil, or Wednesday's Vigil, however you want to say it. and hanging off of what is ostensibly the world tree for 9 days and 9 nights. And he learns all this stuff, but whatever he learned doing that, hanging on the world tree, he forgets. He can't remember. It fades away. So he's got this character arc, but instead of being a 180, like an ideal character arc would be, it's a 360. I think it's fantastic. And I mean, that leaves open, again, for showrunners for the TV show, if Neil Gaiman, and he has come back and written stories about Shadow since American Gods, but it makes it open for him to do a sequel or to continue these short stories and to have these adventures. But I'd like to point something out now. I don't want to wait until a future episode. In Norse theology, because this is what built their religious beliefs, it's not mythology, because I don't want somebody coming up to me and saying, oh, and you're Christian mythology. No. It is theology to me. Therefore, Norse theology, Odin sacrifices himself to himself by hanging off of the world tree for 9 days and 9 nights. And it's in that time that he gains wisdom and the runes are revealed to him and all this stuff. So in Christianity, which, yeah, we have Jesus Christ is supposed to be fully God and fully man. Right? Right. So he sacrifices himself to God himself in order to save humanity. That is what Christians believe. Now, back to American Gods, we have this idea of Shadow being conceived by a god, Odin, Wednesday, whatever, and then makes a sacrifice of himself to Odin during the vigil, hanging 9 days, 9 nights on the world tree. It's an interesting parallel, and there's actually in the 10th anniversary edition, there is an apocryphal chapter where, while Shadow's hanging on the world tree, he has a beer. Well, no, not a beer. He has some wine with Jesus, because Jesus. And they have a conversation. Neil Gaiman says, it prefaces this sort of, excerpt by saying, I took it out of the original because it didn't feel right. I really wanted to write it, and I wrote it, but it didn't feel like it belonged in the manuscript the first time around, and so now when we redid it, I put it back in, and then I took it out because it didn't feel right, so I'm going to put it back here, and we'll just call it apocryphal. And apparently, I was watching a video earlier about the TV show. Apparently, Jesus shows up in the TV show. So, I don't know. I haven't watched the TV show. Please don't get mad at me if I'm wrong. It apparently does. So, so it's an interesting parallel between Shadow and Jesus. And I don't know if there's any, moral or theological significance to this. I don't care, personally. It's just a very interesting parallel to see. So, but that's all I have to say about Shadow, honestly. And I still don't feel like I've really sufficiently covered him, and I'm sure that I will keep revisiting this book and this character over and over and over again, either, by listening to the book or just thinking about it in my mind, because I feel like I'm barely scratching the surface.